Yes, we're back, truth be told, where we dive deep into history, mysticism, and the mysteries that shape our world today. We're exploring one of the most enigmatic and influential ancient texts, the Book of Enoch. For centuries, this apocalyptic script remained hidden, known only in fragments and preserved in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. But what secrets does it hold? How did it shape Jewish mysticism, the Kabbalah, and even Gnostic mythology? And who were the Watchers, the fallen angels who shared forbidden knowledge with humanity? Well, joining us today, scholar Tobias Churton, an expert in esoteric traditions. He's going to guide us through this groundbreaking work, the first comprehensive exam of the Book of Enoch prophecies, our origins and history. What does it reveal about nature of divine wisdom and the dangers of knowledge forbidden to mankind? Well, I'm Tony Sweet with Truth Be Told. Today we're going to find out with the one and only author, Tobias Churton. Mr. Tobias, how are you?
Better for meeting you, Tony.
Well, I see the guitar and all the music in the background, so you're probably used to applause with all your concerts that you put on.
Oh, naturally. I can't remember the last time I played to an audience, but it's generally gone down quite well.
Well, that's great. Well, you know, it's amazing because I'm not shocked, you being an author and a musician, because, you know, creative people, we need many outlets to fulfill our needs and wants and creative minds. So congrats on being both.
Yes, well, I mean, poetry is the essence of good writing, and the root of poetry and music is the same.
Yeah. In fact, when I was a kid, my teacher had us write poetry for a class, and I ended up getting my poem published in a book. So I can actually say I was a published poet.
Brilliant.
But well, today we're here to talk about this amazing book coming out, the Book of Enoch Revealed, The Wicked Watchers, Metatron, and the Fruits of Forbidden Knowledge. Well, I mean, I actually have a history of doing family trees, and one of my side of the family trees, their last name is Enoch's, which... So anytime I see the name, it kind of perks me up. So, but this was a very forbidden and also lost knowledge for many years. Can you tell us first of all about the Book of Enoch, and then how you got started in writing this book?
Yeah, I mean, how I got started. The Book of Enoch. There are 3 books of Enoch in actual fact, but they were all written at different times. Mm-hmm. And the main one, which has been called the Book of Enoch, because it appears in the Ethiopian canon as the works of the prophet Enoch, and it's included in their Bible. It's one of the earliest churches in the world, of course, Ethiopia. St. Philip in Acts of the Apostles is traditionally ascribed with the responsibility of bringing Christianity to Ethiopians. But it's the only church, the Tewahedo Church, Orthodox Church of Ethiopia, is the only church in the world where the Book of Enoch, as they call it, Prophet Enoch, is part of the canon and sits next to the Book of Job.
Oh, wow.
And this isn't a book that they were prepared to dispense with, but something odd happened in the early Christian period where there was a division of opinion about how seriously to take this Book of Enoch. Now, Enoch is 7th in line from Adam, according to the book of Genesis. So we're talking about a very early patriarch indeed.
Yeah.
In the pre-flood period, which is almost not a period. It's more of a myth and myths and legend. So even in Roman times, people were asking, how could a work by Enoch possibly survive the flood and the great intervening time? We now know that the Book of Enoch, we're talking about the first Book of Enoch, is a collection of other books, small, I suppose you'd call them treatises in a way, but they're separate works. There's a book of astronomical knowledge. There's what's called the Book of the Watchers, which is the main mythological core of the work. and there are subsequent other elements called the Epistle of Enoch and so forth. And these works were written sometime between about 200 BC,
Wow.
Before Christ, and some of the elements may be from even before that, and into the period really shortly before the birth of Jesus, so, period of King Herod. So it gives us a tremendous insight into a period of history which has always fascinated me, because very little knowledge of it is called the Second Temple period. After the Jews returned from exile in Babylon in 538 BCE, there's a kind of, in most people's understanding of the Bible, there's a kind of long wait. Not much is sort of happening, and until you get, the Roman Empire has taken over that part of the Middle East, and Jesus is born, and we're talking about Christianity. So there are so many things one can say about the Book of Enoch, apart from its having disappeared for large parts of history from the Western world. It's almost difficult. It's almost difficult to know where to start. But what's becoming clearer is a book that was once dispensed with, really almost written off as apocryphal, meaning it had no authority, or as pseudepigraphical, which means that it had false authorship. In other words, it couldn't possibly have been written by this patriarch Enoch. And it's now becoming clear that it is, in fact, one of the most telling collections of texts that have a huge impact on understanding the origins of Christianity, which didn't appear out of nowhere.
Right.
And a tremendous insight into understanding things like the world that is slowly becoming visible through the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, as they're called. And I've had cause in my work on Gnostic Gospels, so-called apocryphal Gospels, and the origins of Christianity. I've had recourse to the Book of Enoch before, and every time I've confronted it, it's always amazed me. I can't understand why it wasn't a major subject when I was studying theology at Oxford, and it amazes me continually. Its contents seem to predict so much that came later, especially things like, we've all heard of Jesus being described as the Son of Man,
right,
for example. This is a phrase which has a huge currency in the later parts of the first Book of Enoch, and the idea of the Son of Man as being a kind of co-equal partner with God in heaven is there, and it gives us an understanding of what was in Jesus's mind, not what people thought about him, but what he was thinking about himself at the time,
which is very important.
His self-consciousness, absolutely. How did he relate? Why did he says things like the Son of Man will be must suffer and die, which was a radical viewpoint. And why is he saying this in Galilee, a particularly interesting area? So the book that I've written is intended to be a comprehensive study of the three books of Enoch, of where they came from, how they were discovered, and how they've been received all the way from pre-Christian times to the present day. And there's no other work that brings all this together with the very best and latest scholastic expertise. I don't think the book is written in a dry fashion, but it is definitely, it attends to detail. It's not a book of opinions. It's not speculation. If there is a speculation in it, it's very clearly indicated that this is a possibility, but right, it is unproven. So it's a scholarly account for everybody to really get to grips with what was happening in the world that Jesus grew up in, and its importance later on. And so many things that I know in religion in America particularly, the Book of Revelations has had phenomenal influence.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and to some people, it often seemed to me that was their religion. That book is everything. It's all about when you get to heaven, or are you one of the 144,000 saved, and all the rest of it. And of course, when you've seen the Book of Enoch, you can see the Book of Revelation in gestation. All the key ideas that come about in the Revelation book attributed to John of Patmos, all of that, you can see it in its infancy, and its development then becomes logical, and you can get a real historic perspective rather than a religious mania about it.
Which I love. I love that. And you did mention the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I was curious to go a little bit more into that, because it did contribute to understanding the origins and kind of authenticity of the Book of Enoch. Can you go a little bit more into how that helped kind of legitimate?
Okay. Let's just look at this. First of all, it was often thought by scholars that this Book of Enoch was a Christian work or a Jewish work that had been Christianized because of its resemblance to elements in the New Testament. To my astonishment when I found this, and ought to astonish people, in fact, there were 7 copies of elements of the Book of Enoch discovered at Qumran in the 1950s, along with all the other Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, a lot of people have heard about the Dead Sea Scrolls. In Israel, you'll find the Museum of the Book, which has the Orthodox writings of Isaiah in it and so on. And then there's all these religious works which indicated a very different kind of exclusive Judaism. But there in the Qumran stuff is Aramaic version 7 of the Book of Enoch. So it was obviously important, and it's dated before Christian times. So clearly this work was a hot book when Jesus would have been brought up. I would date his birth at about 7 BC. So a few years before Herod, the Idumean king, who was made effective king of Israel by the Roman Senate, a few years before he died. So you're kind of you're in the base camp of the origins of Christianity.
That's pretty amazing. And how did the church, once the book Dead Sea Scrolls kind of contribute to the Book of Enoch, how did the church, what was their view after that was discovery, and how did it contribute to Book of Enoch? There's
been no ecclesiastical reaction. I'm not aware of any statements from the Vatican on the subject. Yeah. In fact, the Vatican was the first to receive a copy of the first Book of Enoch as long ago as about 1774.
Really?
James Bruce, who was the Laird of Kinnaird in Scotland, he was an explorer, went looking for the source of the Nile, and he spent a long time in Ethiopia, which very, very few people had ever explored at all. He learned a bit of the language Ge'ez, and he got to know the emperor of Ethiopia. And after many adventures, he came back, and this is all told in the book, is extraordinary fellow. He came back with a copy, I think four copies of the first Enoch, in their completeness, which the Western world hadn't seen since Roman times. And he came out of the desert bedraggled and ill, and his feet he could hardly walk. And he turns up in Egypt, and he goes to see the Khedive, the ruler of Egypt, who dresses his feet, as it were, and looks after him for a little bit. And he comes back to Europe, and he comes back to Italy, and one of the first places he puts a copy of this book is with the Vatican. So they would always say, oh, well, we know about this book. Fine, we got one of the first copies. The next copy went to the King of France, Louis XIV, and the subsequent copy was given to the king in England and to the Oxford University. The point was that nobody translated it. They got this text.
They're like, great, thanks.
There were no Ethiopian scholars of the Ethiopian language. So it wasn't until 1821, so nearly 50 years later, that a wonderful scholar, Reverend Lawrence, who was the Archbishop of Cashel in Ireland, he did the first translation in 1821, which was published in Oxford, which had only minor effect when it came out. And it's very interesting to see how this sort of build-up of Enoch grows through the 19th century into the 20th and doesn't really explode until the Dead Sea Scrolls, because the Dead Sea Scrolls discovery finally make us realize this wasn't an apocryphal Christian or Judeo-Christian work. It's part of what was accepted as authoritative biblical literature in the period in which Jesus was growing up. So it's now been reassessed, and I think it will. I don't know. Things are moving very fast these days. I think when the word gets round, it will have a tremendous effect.
Wow, and you said, like, well, at least the Catholic Church and maybe the Protestants didn't change their mind, but the Book of Enoch did have a significant influence on the Second Temple, and it did shape early thought of the Jewish people. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because it did have some influence. So what is your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's the work of one of the many competing factions that arose in yet another great crisis of Jewish history, which was, let's go back, in 331 BC, 330 years before the Christian era begins. Alexander the Great invaded Egypt, and his death shortly after, his great empire, which he'd created, which was the biggest empire anyone had ever seen, was divided up among his generals. There's Alexander of Macedon, and his generals fell out almost immediately, as you'd expect in these cases. And one of them became the Ptolemies, the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt, and another one was the Seleucids, who ruled parts of Greece and parts of Syria. And these two, the Seleucids, named after Seleucus, and the Ptolemies, of which the famous Cleopatra was a descendant, were at war constantly. And one of the places they were at war over was over the remnants of the old Judea, Israel. Now, in about 200 BC, there's a big battle between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids at what we know in the New Testament as Caesarea Philippi, but then was called either Dan, the biblical Dan, or Paneas, which is the source of the River Jordan, and it's just below Mount Hermon. And the result of this was that there is a revival of the Jewish faith in Jerusalem, because the Ptolemies have been kicked out, and the Ptolemies was seen as a corruption of the Jewish faith. And the Seleucids seemed friendly to the Jews and allowed them to collect taxes for themselves and enrich their temple. And out of that period comes a figure called Onias III, who's a high priest in Jerusalem and is reckoned historically to be a very righteous man. Now, then comes Antiochus IV, the Seleucid king, who falls out with Jerusalem totally and bans Judaism and commits abominations in the temple, a lot of things you read about in apocalyptic literature, the abomination of desolation. He's really the first. He that's him. He has a pig presented in the temple, which of course was anti-religious, and insists the priests eat pork, and then he just bans the whole religion. And the reaction to that is comes through Judas Maccabeus, the famous operas written about him, and he fights the Seleucids over a long period, and he's eventually killed, and most of his family are killed in the fight. Out of that comes a kind of truncated, difficult period of crisis, and the books of Enoch appear in this period, as does the book of Daniel, and they're all saying this period of Jewish history is not a thing to be despaired of. What's going to happen is that God has always known this. He's always known that he's had a plan from the very beginning. And the books of Enoch it describe God's plan for Israel, and that the guilty will be sentenced to flames, and the justified righteous will be exalted to heaven. And that whole notion that we have in our religion of the punishment of the wicked and the justification of the righteous, this is the crucible period, 2nd century BC, when this is the live issue amongst certain groups of wisdom writers in Jerusalem, but particularly we think now in Galilee. And this has been slightly complicated today because the 7 copies were found at Qumran. There's been a lot of speculation that in fact this Enochic Judaism, as scholars now call it, Enochic Judaism, had a particular center at Qumran, which is of course just south of, it's the northern, northwestern part of the Dead Sea. And so there's been this idea that there was a separate Essene community which favored and loved the works of Enoch because it has a peculiar theology. Its theology is extraordinary insofar as it can be argued from the text that the evil came into the world not through human agency, not through the fault of man, but something that man could not possibly control, which was the fall of angels.
The Watchers.
The Watchers, the wicked Watchers who descend. You have a reference to it in Genesis chapter 6, where the sons of God, which means the heavenly court, certainly members of them, are so enamored, so sexually turned on by the sight of human women that they descend on Mount Hermon, close to Dan, as we say, and completely corrupt mankind. And there's the phrase in First Enoch, he says, to their leader, Shemhaza, to him, and later Azazel, another wicked angel, they say, to him ascribe all sin. And this is a very, very devastating conception, and it's very peculiar to the Enochic literature. In other words, human beings can't avoid sin because it comes from a spiritual renegade power over which human beings have no ultimate control. They can only suffer, and they need supernatural assistance. And without God's intervention, they are incapable of dealing with sin. And this is the fundamental concept in Pauline Christianity, that if God does not send Jesus to humanity, humanity is forever under the sway of sin.
Yeah, and I know early Christians and Jewish traditions, I'm sure they interpreted the Watchers differently than the way we see it now. Is there something that you can explain to us of how they interpreted that? Were they viewed more of like a maleficent being, or like more complex light? How did they see them?
Well, according to the first book of Enoch, the Watchers are defeated absolutely thanks to Enoch, who tells them that they are going to be totally destroyed. But they're not completely destroyed. You can't completely destroy a spiritual heavenly being because they're inherently immortal.
Right.
This is the origin, by the way. People have heard of people burning in hellfire forever and ever.
Right.
I mean, this is one of the great threats, is it not, of evangelical religion, that the sinner will burn forever. How many years have we listened to this? That now no one's really aware why you have to burn forever. Well, the point is it's because the watchers were originally from heaven and therefore cannot be killed because they are immortal. The only fit punishment is an eternal burning or an eternal imprisonment in a lower world, chained up. And of course, then in the development of the apocalyptic idea, all sinners are lumped in with them. So you get all those who've been tainted by sin have to join this eternal fire. The original logic is lost because the original logic was eternal fire is only for eternal beings. Well, later we're talking about sinful mortals. The idea was that if you're sinful, then you cannot be immortal. So it does seem a little hard on the mortals that they should have to burn forever and ever, because you've effectively made them immortal by burning them forever. So you get to live forever, but in a very
that doesn't make sense. Yeah.
But you can understand then the logic of it, and this is one of the many things that the Book of Enoch illuminates, is our understanding of our ideas of divine punishment and the rewards of righteousness and so forth.
When you say, not you, but I mean, we've heard this forever, forbidden knowledge. What is the forbidden knowledge that they shared with humanity that was so bad?
Practically everything. According to the first book of Enoch, the angels brought down knowledge of chemistry, alchemy, as it's later called,
right.
Of women's cosmetics, the use of cosmetics to make women more alluring. That is regarded as knowledge brought from another world to this world. The knowledge of breastplates, which is an interesting factor in itself, because breastplates were always thought to be invented by the Greeks, which suggests that the book was written actually in a time when breastplates were an offensive weapon against the Jewish people. They brought knowledge of every kind of cunning, deceit. I suppose today we'd probably say banking. I don't think banking is mentioned specifically, but certainly the idea of taking over other people's land, all of the arts of war, all of the arts of poisoning, of anything you can think of that tends towards disruption or murder. This is the knowledge that the Watchers bring, and it's curiously this knowledge exists on a higher plane, but human beings were not meant to know it, and naturally have been forced to abuse it. So they have this idea of a humanity corrupted from above, rather than the idea we normally think of as we're corrupted from below, from our baser instincts.
Right.
But and this was one of the reasons why some of the early Christian, the patristic writers, the church fathers, found the book difficult to swallow. They couldn't accept the idea that an angel, for example, could be corrupt at all. So that they found that doctrinally hard to accept. But of course, they weren't saying that all angels were like this. It's only a renegade bunch. And for this reason, I mean, the book had great difficulty. Although, you wonder, I don't think it had much difficulty for Jesus and his generation, because it was such a positive vindication of the righteous. And also, take one of the chapters in the book I talk about is Jesus' anti-demon operation. Some people are uncomfortable today with the idea that Jesus seemed to spend a lot of time and teaching his disciples also to cast demons out of people. And we're not comfortable with demons today in that sense, except in horror films, which we find entertaining rather than disturbing, really. Except The Exorcist, which took it rather seriously. Now, what is this getting rid of demons thing? Where does this come from? Well, it goes back to the Book of Enoch, because in the first Book of Enoch, when the Watchers impregnate human women, they produce giants of enormous size, like skyscrapers, who eat human beings and generally cause every kind of evil and disruption. And when they are judged by God and destroyed in the Great Flood, these giants, because they're of part divine origin, cannot be totally destroyed. So they inhabit parts of the world, lower parts of the world, chasms and deep places, and subsist as demons. And this all gets joined to the Greek idea of the daimons, who are kind of part angels, part demons, part gods. And the world of Jesus and the New Testament and of the world, well, you even find it today, is a world pullulating with these kind of relics from the Watcher's activity. So Jesus, for example, cannot destroy these demons. He casts them out. And you have the touching story in Mark where the Gadarene swine, Jesus casts out a legion, a whole, enormous number of these demons, and they go and jump into a bunch of pigs who throw themselves off a cliff. The Gadarene swine. The pigs, of course, die, but we don't know what happens to the demons. But they've been cast out of a human being.
Maybe they went
anyway,
fish or something.
driven mad by them. The ramifications of all these stories are enormous. One of them, of course, today is that people, given the kind of prevalence of science fiction and so forth, have tended to think that this may be a primal myth of human origin, namely that we were visited by this, the word is the Nephilim, which really refers to the giants. We're visited in remote past who taught us how to, I suppose, make pyramids and a few things, and generally kick-started civilization. Apparently we couldn't have done it without them. And they would... The Book of Enoch has been latched onto as an explanation of extraterrestrial involvement in human evolution.
We talk about that a lot on my show.
That idea has multiplied, and I'm almost sad to sort of say.
We talk about it a lot.
People's trip. Of course it's a compelling idea. Is it plausible? All I can say is when you've got a perfectly simple explanation of what's going on in that period, you don't need to go to convoluted explanations, many of whom today are simply influenced by our own rocket science and are projecting that into the past. How did people make these pyramids? Well, we pretty well know how they made them. Why they made them is much more difficult to understand because we are not those people. We're not those pharaohs. We don't have their mentality. Their cosmic viewpoint is alien to us. The real alien is the difference between now and then. And
only if we had a time machine.
Exactly. Well, we have one in our heads, and we're too quick to use it. We're too quick to imagine we know what they were really thinking. We can, even when I'm talking about the Book of Enoch, I can't be absolutely certain that I'm understanding those myths in exactly the way that they were understood when they were written, or the kind of world in which there could be jokes and subtle elements of the story that we simply miss because we're not part of their humor and worldview. Well, the whole point of that's what scholarship is trying to do, is bring more and more understanding into, so we get a closer view of the past. But we can't reproduce the past. It would be wonderful if we could, wouldn't it?
It would be wonderful. And, it just for modern day with people texting, you could text something and what you mean is not what they interpret. It happened to me just the other day. So I couldn't imagine over 2,000 years ago of interpreting something that, is an ancient language and trying to interpret it to make it, current day humans or people to understand that we may not get the complete gist of what they were writing. But
we have one we have one saving grace in this imaginative adventure that life embarks us upon, is that I don't think we are fundamentally any different to our ancestors.
Probably not. No. Yeah, I agree.
I think with the furniture of our imagination is highly reliant on the period we're growing up in. I mean, I remember first seeing television when I was 3, and that has shaped my worldview, no question about it. I heard about Kennedy's assassination through a television, not through some, all of that.
Right,
it shapes the way you the perspectives you have. And I do think one thing that is a consistent factor in human life is humor. But humor changes. What makes people laugh? I'm sure we would laugh at a lot of old jokes, but we wouldn't find them all that funny.
Right. They call them dad jokes, they're like,
Yes, they're sort of tired. They probably sound tired to us, but they probably had them in fits of hysterics
right.
1,000 years ago. And I often think there are jokes and allusions in ancient literature which we just completely miss. A little bit of wordplay here, a little bit of wordplay there.
Right.
And, the trouble is we tend to regard all these texts as some sort of sacred writing that can never be gainsaid. It's all from God. Well, they're not. Whatever God has got to do with it, he's got to do with us, and he's got to do with the way we express ourselves. But, it is perfectly obvious that everything human beings do has an element of imperfection about it. And expressing our spiritual aspirations and hopes, as I say, is highly conditioned by the period we live in. There are aspects of these stories that are universal, however, and I think we can get closer to our ancestors. But I think our ancestors would find us very alien. I mean,
I'm sure they would.
if you ask them about us and our world, I mean, I'm sure in many ways they'd be quite disgusted anyway, but they'd find a lot familiar. But I think they'd probably think we came from another galaxy. I think if they had the idea of galaxies,
Well, my grandparents thought most of my generation probably came, and I'm in my 50s.
Absolutely. Do you remember that thing, the Midwich Cuckoos, when these very strange children emerge in a village, and they're too intelligent for their age, and they're too determined, and they're willful.
Yeah.
Everyone it naturally comes the idea that they are from a distant galaxy, and of course, in the story, they are.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. I remember, talking about the Beatles, the 4 Mop Tops. They must have turned up in America in '64, I think Timothy Leary, the LSD guru, said he described the Beatles as 4 avatars. Well, an avatar is a visitant from heaven. I don't think John, Paul, George, and Ringo thought of themselves like that.
Probably not, and their parents probably didn't either.
It was all in their head, Yeah. It was the effect of cultural shock.
Yeah.
He was going through a cultural shock. I think that a lot of people in the 60s and to this day are going through cultural shocks. And our natural tendency is to attribute our cultural shocks to up there. Mm-hmm. It's something out there that's doing it to us, And so we better go and explore and see what's out there. Well, we have explored what's out there, and you can either say it's marvelous, or you can say, as I have a sneaking suspicion, it's all a bit disappointing. There's an awful lot of methane gas out there. And if you could smell the cosmos, which I used to think must be a divine thing, it would smell pretty bad. It's sort of a vast geological toilet. You can quote me on that. But
I got it quoted.
That's, but we're hopefully going to find there'll be other ways of looking at it. I mean, it is, of course, also the universe is a play of light. It is a play of fundamental forces. It may be a play of things that we have less understanding of than a spectrograph can tell us. We may be missing out on the meaning of it all, not what it is or what elements it's composed of, but there may be more meaning to it than I'm capable of grasping at this time. But my general feeling is that while it's an incredible technological achievement, what we've achieved since the Second World War in terms of space exploration, I think it's inspiring. But it's inspiring to me because it tells us something about human beings. It hasn't told me a lot about the universe, except it's not nearly as exciting as the Renaissance thought it would be.
I just remember in the 70s going to Disneyland and going through Tomorrowland. I think that's what it was called. And just seeing some of the stuff that they predict that the future would hold. And we were so excited. Now in 2020...
I felt exactly the same.
Now in 2025, we have our phones. When there's an update or an upgrade, we don't even blink an eye about what technology, AI come out. Oh, that's cool. We don't really overly get excited like we used to before any of this technology was there. So, yeah, we kind of take it for granted now versus what 50 years ago that we used to get extremely excited about what the future holds.
But we're still motivated by mythology
for sure.
Enormous amount, and we often, as you rightly say, take for granted our technological achievements, which are immense and mystifying to those who don't understand the technology and science that goes into it. Mm-hmm. But the myths are strangely more powerful than the technology. There is still people can't get away from the notion, for example, that there must be something more about the world and the life than is visible. Other people will naturally feel some power from another world must save us. Other people will be paranoid and feel that there is a power from another world that is trying to destroy us. And these feelings go back thousands of years. They are the stuff of which our subconscious responds to. And they seem to be more powerful than all the optimism that you and I would have grown up with in the 60s and 70s and 80s. Was starting to fade, of course, by then. But certainly in the 60s, the optimism was really extraordinary. A part of it was the relief that the war was over. And they've been nearly getting on for a generation that didn't have the war experience. So there was a kind of curious cultural vacuum, which was filled very quickly by utopian expectations. Happy Christmas, war is over. Mm-hmm. Being, symptomatic of that beautiful hope, which the horrible reality tries to wipe away. I won't say it has wiped it away, but I go back to my point that the myth is actually more powerful than the reality. What we put our faith in is something that is not tangible. That's always been the case with man's search for wisdom. We don't judge everything by the outside. So we're talking about the Books of Enoch because the Books of Enoch are trying to get to the inside of things. They're trying to understand what is God's way with the world. How do we cope with the terrible injustices that are perpetrated, the lies, the duplicity. All of these things are addressed in the Books of Enoch and obviously subsequently in other religious works. In the Books of Enoch, as I present them, you kind of you're on the ground floor of this development. You're seeing it almost as it's happening, and that I find that for me, that's why you were asking what led me to write the book, was the growing realization over quite a few years that one would have to focus on the Books of Enoch, not just use them, not just refer to them. One's got to understand them. And luckily, we've reached a point of the scholarship now, which has been going on for some hundreds of years on the subject, where there's a story really worth telling and that can be understood by everybody.
Two things, because we're running out of time, two things I really want to touch on. That Enoch did ascend. Well, he said he ascended to heaven and received instruction from God. And then later, in the third book of Enoch, was transformed into the angel Metatron. Can you talk about that? Because for years, working with the paranormal show and mystics and stuff like this, I started hearing Metatron. I was like, well, I didn't even, honestly, where I grew up, Metatron was never spoke of. So it kind of took me a while to get to know who Metatron was. But can you talk about that transformation into Metatron?
Yeah, I'm trying to sort of sum up an enormous body of work that's been done on this. I was thinking of that movie in the 80s, Tron.
Oh, yeah.
There's something about the name Metatron, which translates into our science fiction world very quickly, interestingly enough. And it is a word that has certainly, we're not absolutely sure at all what its origin is. But it has a kind of power of its own. Now, in the third book of Enoch, which is where Enoch becomes Metatron, is very late, but we can't precisely date it. Scholarship dates it between 200 AD and 800. Right,
that's a big difference.
For a lot of people, that won't mean very much, but it's as a dating, it's extremely wide.
Yes,
but we know it's quite a lot later than the earlier Enoch work. And its background and its mentality is very different, but it's been very influential because it's introduced this idea of Metatron. And Metatron is taken in the Renaissance by people like Robert Flood, who was an English mystical Rosicrucian doctor in time of Queen Elizabeth, time of Jamestown being founded. And he identified Metatron with the Word of God, the Logos, and effectively with Christ, because Metatron is God's way of upholding the entire universe. It's the hidden wisdom which sustains everything. And this has come out of the transformation of one individual, Enoch, who it says in Genesis 6, Enoch walked with God, and God took him, which is one of the most profound little bits of writing I've ever read. Enoch walked with God, and God took him. It was because he was so close to the ideal of what a human being should be that God takes him out of human normality, even mortality. And it is thought in the mythology of Enoch that he never died, and he's always lived in heaven. And he's sent from heaven to persuade his son Methuselah that God is going to judge mankind in the flood. But the whole story of that is actually a prediction of what's going to happen in what we now call proto-Christian times, the 2 centuries before the Christian era, and which becomes part of the Christian mythology, because if you read the Epistle of Jude in your New Testament, Enoch is quoted directly there as being the bringer of judgment. And he's he's the only prophet quoted in the Bible whose work is not in the Bible, Enoch. So extraordinary distinction. But Metatron is the, in the end, he's very close to the idea of the Son of Man as a heavenly being who is like a man, as God is described in the prophet Ezekiel. He's like a man, that he has features like human features. Not a popular idea at the moment. We've sort of gone through that, oh, God doesn't look like an old man sort of thing.
Right.
But they never said that man's image, what we are, somehow, according to Genesis, and certainly in the Books of Enoch, man's being is dependent on the image or the presentation of the visual presentation of God himself. It's quite extraordinary. Now, Metatron is described at one point as little Jahveh being the name of the holy name of God. He's almost an equal, and he's accessible to human mystical ascent. So why do you need a Metatron? Why isn't God there? Because there's always this idea right through the biblical period and the post-biblical period that God works through his court, through his surroundings, through his angels. Gabriel announces to Mary that she's going to give birth to Jesus, and so Uriel guides Tobias in the Book of Tobit. He uses. Now, Metatron becomes his number one angel. I think he's really another version of the Son of Man figure in the first Book of Enoch, in the Book of Parables, as it's called. Do you know, a very strange thing happened about 5 years ago. Bizarre story. I was looking for a girl I once knew, and as you do on the internet, you wonder if they've appeared in something. Right. And I found the girl's name, and there was a contact. She was a spiritual advisor.
Oh, wow. All right.
I don't think I influenced her that much, you know. Anyway, I contacted her through the internet connection, you know, the contact, and I said, "Are you by any chance the whatever her name was that we went out with, you know, many years ago?" And she said, "No, I'm a representative of the angel Metatron." And we had a long conversation.
Wow.
About Metatron. I mean, now I don't know what. And she said, "Well, this is the sort of thing that happens to me all the time," because she said Metatron is a powerful spirit. Now, she for her, Metatron is a kind of god-like figure that exists on another plane, that gave her advice and you know, inspiration. She didn't know practically anything about the origin of the term or
that's hilarious.
It had just come to her. The most extraordinary thing. I mean, actually, funny enough, thinking about it now, it even seems more extraordinary. At the time, I thought, oh, well, you know. And I never did get to find out what happened to my old girlfriend.
Well, you met a new one.
Well, luckily, it turned out, everything turned out wonderfully. But perhaps we should ascribe that to Metatron. So Metatron is a major figure in Jewish mysticism and in Islamic mysticism too. He's there. I think in the book there's a picture of an Islamic representation of Metatron. There's a long discussion about the origin of his name, which is fascinating in itself. And somehow this figure of Metatron for a lot of people is a door through which they can go through and get insight into personal insight into the way God works with the world, which very often is not the way we think God might work with the world, but that's the way it has to be. So actually, funnily enough, saying that, maybe that's what my book is really about. It's really it's an insight into the way God works with the world and the way we most importantly, the way we human beings can understand how God works with the world.
Which we need more now than ever, because I think a lot of people do interpret so many different ways. That's why we clash too many times, and that's why the world is probably...
Yeah, and a lot of it's just down to the fact that people don't don't feel up to the scholarship. And
right.
my job has always been to bring the scholarship into the debate. A lot of people say, I don't like academics. They talk in a way that nullifies what I really feel and what I know in myself. And I'm not. I'd say I'm not one of those people. I do what I do because I'm interested in the truth, and I'm not. There's no such thing as academic truth.
Right.
It's either true and you followed honestly your source and your inspiration, or not. And people may judge, as my father used to say, by their acts ye shall know them. One of the acts I do is write, and you can judge it by the writing.
And people can go to Amazon. You can go to tobiaschurton.com and pick up the book. It's coming out, March 4th?
Yes, next week.
Which is exciting. So please get your book. We could probably talk 3 hours and still not touch on everything, but unfortunately we got to go. But Tobias, thank you so much. I always appreciate the authors that take the time of doing the research and doing, the work that most of us don't have time to do or even desire to do. But we do want the knowledge. So I appreciate you putting this amazing book together, and hopefully we can meet again and talk about another book or even continue this discussion. But I appreciate you.
That's wonderful, Tony. I look forward to it.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. Fridays right here, you have Truth Be Told with me, and we bring people like Tobias on the show to bring you the knowledge that, like I said, most of us don't get to hear about. Metatron. I mean, many of us don't even know who he was until people like Tobias bring it to us. So please watch Robert Hensley Monday at 3 o'clock with Truth Be Told Going Wild, rewilding your journey, and then Truth Be Told Transformation with Bonnie Burkett, more of the spiritual, mystical portion of the Truth Be Told brand. And then, of course, me every Friday. You can watch us on the Club Paranormal Network, on our YouTube channel. Subscribe, leave a comment. Please share this with everybody. And until next time, take care of yourself and each other, because nobody else will.